Good morning, Spirit and Truth Sanctuary and Connection people. I know you are used to seeing my brother's face before you see mine on Tuesday morning. He is stuck in a little bit of traffic on Memorial Drive, and he will be here shortly. You will hear from him at the end, but we are going to go ahead and get started. And today, my joy of the Lord for you is I realize that we still have one more Tuesday before Halloween, but today, guess what? I have a legit ghost story for you. So that's my joy. That's going to be my joy of the Lord today. But first, we are going to open with our morning blessing. Spirit of Truth, we come to you today to declare these intentions that we as a corporate body are focusing on this year. We have joyful, energetic bodies. We have loving, compassionate hearts. We have restful, alert minds, and we experience lightness of being in all things. It is our intention today and for the rest of this year to replace any resistance, disorder, effort, or struggle with gentleness, clarity, health, eagerness, love, joy, and freedom as our natural state. It is our prayer, our intention, and our heart's desire to be fully awake today and always. We believe it, we perceive it, and now we receive it in the name and nature of the Christ. Amen, and so it is. Okay, let's go to our quotes. The first one, life is not happening to you, it's responding to you. Okay, those are two different things. Next, man's power of choice enables him to think like an angel or a devil, a king or a slave. Whatever he chooses, his mind will create and manifest. Next, I like this one. There is a difference between being stuck somewhere and choosing to stay somewhere. Next, someday everything will make perfect sense. So for now, laugh at the confusion, smile through the tears, and keep reminding yourself that everything happens for a reason. Now, I would change that last part a little bit to say, everything is always working for your good. As my brother preached on Sunday, even if at the moment the face of God looks like your enemy, it's still always working out for your good. I heard someone say the other day that something that I just love. He said, I'm inverse paranoid. Instead of thinking everyone's out to get me, I think everyone's out to help me. So I love that. I want to become that. I want to become an inverse paranoid. My family tells a funny story about my granddaddy Paulk when he got to his older age and his driving was not what it once was. Sometimes people would honk the horn at him, and when they would, he was such an optimistic man by nature, he would just look over at my grandmother and say, Addie Mae, there goes somebody that knows us. And he would just smile and wave at him. He was an inverse paranoid. Instead of thinking people were angry at him, he was thinking people were loving him. So it's all a matter of perspective, which we've talked about a lot, but we're going to talk about again today. Here's the last quote. Managing the power of choice with all its creative and spiritual implications is the essence of the human experience. All spiritual teachings are directed toward inspiring us to recognize that the power to make choices is the dynamic that converts our spirits into matter and our words into flesh. Choice is the process of creation itself. Okay, my title today is Stuck in the Middle with You, which is the title of a wonderful old 70s song, the main refrain of which is, clowns to the left of me, jokers to the right, here I am, stuck in the middle with you. And those lyrics, of course, imply that the person singing is stuck in the middle of two groups of people who are equally abhorrent to him and with this other person that he's finding, coherence with in the middle. But today, we're going to adjust the meaning a little, and we're going to say it like this. Stuck in the middle with you, meaning yourself. Each of us, when we feel stuck between two things, is stuck basically with ourselves. So that you today, we're just going to pretend for the purposes of our teaching today that stuck in the middle with you is us talking to ourselves. So, as I said, we're also going to talk about perspective. There's an old saying that says, when you've got a donut in front of you, what are you going to choose to look at? The donut or the hole? Meaning, if you're only looking at or focusing on the hole in the middle of the donut, then you'll miss the fact that there's a donut in front of you, which is much less exciting than realizing you have a donut in front of you. I was listening to a podcast the other day about cults and how they work, and I was particularly struck by a statement one of the hosts made describing how cult members view the world, and this is about perspective. He said they're intensely focused on a tiny sliver of manipulated reality. And I love that because it is so descriptive. And you will see as we go on that I am deeply into descriptive language today. The ghost story I'm going to tell is very descriptive language. I can't wait. So get ready. But that's what happens. That's how cult leaders convince people to give up their personal sovereignty, to give up the right to make decisions for themselves. That's how they get them to give up their money and in some cases even their bodies. They shrink that person's vision and version of reality down to a tiny sliver that they have manipulated to look however they want it to look. And then they somehow get their followers, as the statement says, to intensely focus on just that. And that's when we get into trouble. That's how we get stuck, by focusing too intensely on too small a sliver of reality. And further, as in the case of cults, sometimes a reality that has been manipulated by someone else. So let's go back to our title today, Stuck in the Middle with You. And as I said, for today's purposes, the you represents us, ourselves. Which part of that phrase are we going to focus on? The stuck part or the you part? Pardon the pun, but if we get stuck on the word stuck, that's what the result is going to be, stuck. That is too small a focus, and we miss the bigger, more expansive part that we could and should be focusing on, which is the you part, ourselves. If we intensely focus on the concept of being stuck rather than on ourselves when we're feeling stuck, it's like looking at the hole and missing the donut, okay? So let's talk about perspective for a minute. When you are in the middle of two things, there are a couple of different ways you can view it. You can perceive, one way to view it is to perceive that you are indeed hopelessly stuck, or you can see the fact that you're in the middle of something as in being a bridge between the two, okay? So that is the spatial or space dimension perspective of it. If you want to look at it from the dimension of time, you could perceive that when you're in the middle of two things, you're just in pause mode, just like you would hit pause on some kind of appliance. Not stuck, you're just on pause. And there might be a good reason sometimes for taking that pause. And sometimes that good reason is that we need to practice a little. Now, I've talked about this before. Yes, we are creators. We have the same creative power that God has, not only because we were made in His image, but also because He gave us the power to create and intended for us to do so. So we've got the same power, but we don't have the same level of experience with creating that He does because we haven't been at it as long. For those of you who read the Harry Potter book series or watched any of the movies, you know that the students at the famous school Hogwarts, even the great Harry Potter, the most wonderful, incredible wizard that ever lived, even he couldn't practice magic as well as the professors could when they first walked into the school. In fact, that's the reason why they were at the school, to learn how to practice magic. They had the potential and they had the ability, and they had all the power that they needed. They just didn't have all the techniques down, as it were. They were inexperienced magicians, much like we are inexperienced creators. And so sometimes when we're feeling stuck, a pause would be beneficial to us so that we can get in a little practice. If we are all indeed about to experience a shift in consciousness as a collective group, which I believe we are, where we fully, or at least more fully than we ever have before, realize our creative power, then a pause right now to practice a little bit would indeed be a very good idea. So just like anything else that you start out doing, that you have the ability to do, but not the mastery of just yet, you have to practice. Creating is an innate ability we've been given, but it's our job to cultivate it and grow it and perfect the ability as we ourselves grow. And the important thing to remember is that God is aware of this. He, she, it knows. If we use the common model of God as our parent, either our mother or our father, then look at it from that perspective. When your toddler is first learning a skill, to walk or to feed himself, to tie her shoes, you as a loving parent don't expect that child to get it right 100% of the time or even to do it perfectly the first time, okay? And the fact that the child requires repeated attempts to master whatever skill it is doesn't change that child's worthiness in your eyes at all. Of course it doesn't. So practicing to achieve mastery of creation, of creating our own reality, might take a little time, and that might be one of the reasons why the whole world is on pause right now, so we can practice, because the next level we're going to is masters of the universe, if you want to call it that. We're about to be master creators. So right now, we're kind of in that little phase where we're practicing. Okay, so that's how we can shift our perspective on the word stuck in our title. What about the you part? For this, I want to go back to the same interview that I gave you some information from last week with a man named Jack Canfield, who is the author of the Chicken Soup for the Soul book series. And he says this: if your life isn't where or what you want it to be, the only constant variable is you. Wherever you go, there you are. Okay, so if you feel stuck, who is the one person that you can always count on to be right there with you? You, yourself. Stuck in the middle with you, okay? He goes on, invariably, people seem to keep recreating the same circumstance over and over. I've known people who've been married 5 times, and every time each marriage ends, they think it's their spouse's fault. But the truth is, they keep marrying the same type of person because they are remaining the same type of person. They're not growing or changing. They're just switching partners. In other words, they're not choosing to go higher. And until they do, nothing's going to shift. So then he goes on to talk about some ideas he got from Michael Beckwith that are very similar to the ideas we talk about here. He talks about 4 stages of growth. The first stage, he says, is that of victim. Oh God, why did you do this to me? Okay, so that's the stage we talk about where we look at life through the lens of life happening to us. The next stage is manipulation, where you learn that there are some laws in the universe that you can manipulate. Now, which in this sense isn't negative. It just means you can learn how to use the laws to live the kind of life you want to, like sowing and reaping, all of that. So let's go back to perspective now. This is the higher consciousness version of the concept of manipulation, using a universal law for your own highest good. The lower consciousness version is what we talked about a few minutes ago of how cult leaders manipulate other people's reality for them and take away their personal power. So this stage where we learn to use or manipulate the universal laws would probably correlate, that what he's talking about, that would probably correlate to what we talk about around here as things happening around us or maybe even through us. Now, the next level or stage for us is things happening as us. And this is where we realize we have the power to create. But before we can get to this level, Jack Canfield, talks here about another realization that must happen first. He says, when we start recognizing all these universal laws, we realize there must be a lawmaker somewhere in the universe, and you begin to say to yourself, maybe I need to surrender my will to that which is brighter, smarter, and higher than I am. And then you become a channel for God, and you can say, it's not my will, but thy will. Ultimately, you realize you're not only a channel for God, but you are God. You're not all of God any more than one drop of water is the whole ocean. But the ocean isn't separate from the water it's made of. All of its essence is present in each and every drop. Okay, so that's a different perspective of the you part of stuck in the middle with you. So since he mentioned the ocean here, another quote that I heard the other day is this: when you find yourself stuck at sea, instead of focusing on how to get to the land, focus on falling in love with the voyage, with the ocean. Enjoy the boat you're in and enjoy the ride. So, again, what's the boat that he's talking about? The boat is this human body, this vehicle that we chose to take a ride in through our journey here on this earth plane. What's the ocean? The ocean is our life right now, and right now we're in a pause. Basically, the entire year of 2020 has been a pause for all of us. So instead of hurrying up and trying to figure out how we're going to reach the land on either side, either go back to what we used to know as normal or to go forward into this new age, whichever way you're looking at it, let's not be in such a big hurry. Let's take advantage of the time we've been given to practice our creativity so that we get better at it, so that we can master it. And we do that by moving through these various stages. According to Michael Beckwith and Jack Canfield and my brother, a lot of different people say it a lot of different ways, but it's the same process of moving, as we've been talking about for the last few weeks, from our humanity into our divinity. So I want to say one more thing about being stuck. There is a difference between being stuck and being planted. At first glance, those two things look very much alike, but again, it all depends on your perspective. How are you looking at it? When you've been planted, you're looking at it from the perspective of you're not worried about moving forward, okay? So what direction do things that have been planted move? They don't move this way. They move up, okay? They grow. They don't go forward. They move up. That's an important distinction. So again, don't focus on the stuck. Okay, that's the hole in the donut. Sometimes just a small shift in your perspective from feeling stuck is in that you're unable to move forward. Okay, so if you're unable to move forward, don't, okay? Perhaps the reason you're stuck is because you're not supposed to be moving forward. Maybe you've got to move up first. Maybe you've got to grow, and so you need to pause and practice. So that's pausing and practicing our creative powers is part of growing up and moving into this higher consciousness. When you do that, you're shifting your focus to you, and you are the donut in this scenario, okay? Okay, back to Jack Canfield for just a moment. What we must realize in order to move up these levels is that there is a lawmaker. That's what he said, okay? The one who put all these universal laws that we live by in place, whose will and nature and intellect is higher than ours. Not because we're lowly, unworthy sinners, but because we're just still drops in the ocean. God is the whole ocean. We're just a little drop still. We have all the same elements within us. We're made out of the same stuff as this higher divine mind, this universal lawmaker. Another name we can use for that is divine intelligence, but we're still just a drop. Now, we can decide, because we also have free will, to remain uncultivated. We can decide to look at life from the perspective that we're stuck and decide to stay here. Or we can say, you know what? I've reached the limit of what I can accomplish on this current level I'm on. And if I'm going to grow, if I'm going to move up a level, then I'm going to have to defer or surrender my will to the higher divine will. Okay, I'm going to stop right here. Here it comes. In honor of Halloween, in a week and a half or so, I am going to share with you a ghost story. And it's turn the lights off. Go look in the mirror with a flashlight under your face, so it'll be really scary. So it's from a series that I watched recently that I enjoyed immensely. I'm really into that kind of stuff. So as you're listening to it, try to loosen up and have a little fun with it. Don't get too caught up in any theological aspects of it, because I'm going to tell you right now, this is not my personal philosophy on what happens to you after you die. It's a story. Let's remember it's a story. But, and I'm not saying that I agree or disagree with it. It's just the reason I'm using it is because I think it's an excellent illustration of what happens, even if just on a metaphorical or symbolic level, when a person chooses to stick with their own human will instead of surrendering at the point where they're supposed to grow. You have a choice to make. You can either surrender your will to the higher will, or you can say, no, I still believe my will is better. I'm going to stay right here. They get stuck in all of this duality that we've been talking about for the last few weeks. Instead of using the pause they've been given, which in this case, in the case of the story I'm about to tell you, is this person's physical death, instead of this woman using this situation to surrender and grow up to a higher level of consciousness, she resists it and focuses just on a tiny sliver of reality, which keeps her trapped in a horrible world filled with the worst human emotions imaginable. Because she chooses her will over God's will, in other words, she gets stuck in her misery. So, yes, we are the creators of our own reality. And yes, it is good for us to use our own will at times. But until we've reached mastery level, we've got to rely on a higher will, because we're still just practicing. Humanity as a collective is not a full-grown adult yet. We're still, sad to say, toddlers sometimes. Okay, the ghost story. And another reason I love this is because it's written as a narration, and the wording is just perfect in my opinion, and it's very descriptive language. And it's also said, and I'm not going to be able to do it justice, it's talked by a British woman. And everybody who knows me knows how I love a British accent. It just makes everything sound better. Okay, so my brother said gross. He doesn't like British accents, but I love British accents. Okay. So this story takes place in the 1600s in England, and it begins with the death of a man who has two daughters. And because it's the 1600s, neither of the daughters is going to be allowed to inherit the manor and the grounds, so one of them is going to have to get married in order for them to keep the manor. So the oldest girl writes to one of her distant cousins and invites him to come for a visit and convinces him while he's there to marry her. And the story picks up here after their wedding, where she starts having trouble sleeping at night, okay? So she says, and I'm not going to go into all the details because it's a long thing, obviously, but I'm just going to give you the highlights. She says, the transaction done, the business concluded, the manor saved, young Viola turns her eyes inward. Perhaps it was the room, she'd think. It was her mother's room, her parents' bed, and now hers. Seized by a restlessness new to her heart, she would sleep, but she would wake, and she would walk. And then it shows her waking up every night in the middle of the night and getting up and walking around the house. So then as the story progresses, she has a baby. Shortly afterwards, she realizes she's very sick, and the doctor comes, which if you watch it in the series, it's have y'all seen the plague doctors, what they used to wear, those big like hoods with the long noses that look like a crow. Anyway, it's very scary. Plague doctors look very scary, which adds to the whole ethos of the ghost story. So the plague doctor comes and he examines her, and he goes out and tells her husband and her sister, no, she doesn't have the plague, but it's not good news. She has the lung, which I guess back then was their word that they used to say, they used to describe tuberculosis. So finally, her disease progresses to the degree that they call the pastor, which in England they refer to as the vicar, to come to perform the last rites for her. So here's where we start to see her will being set against the will of God. Okay, here's where she makes the choice. Back to the beautifully written narration. All things exhausted, the vicar came again to perform a rite far more melancholy than the rosy song of matrimony he had sung before. He stood before her bed and quoted, "I go to prepare a place for you, and I will come again and take you to myself, so that where I am, there you may be also. Sister," he says, "you must repeat the rite. Say the words after me." And he begins again, "I go to prepare a place for you." And after several more times of him repeating this, she interrupts him by simply saying, "No." The vicar asks, "What did you say?" She states again, "No, I do not go. Tell your God that I do not go." And she's very, very dramatic when she says this. And then her husband tries to intervene, and he begs her to say the last rite so her soul will not be damned for eternity, which is what they believed would happen to you in that time if you didn't say these last rites. If you didn't say these certain specific magical words, then you wouldn't go to heaven. Funny how 400 years later, some of us are still pretty stuck in that thing of if you don't say this magic prayer, then you won't go to heaven. That was just a free part. But then the sister steps in and she says, if she says she will not go, she will not. So she hangs on literally at death's door for 5 more years on her deathbed. And it says, every time death would come to her door, she would refuse him until she finally succumbs at the hand of her sister, who puts her out of her misery by smothering her, thinking it's an act of mercy. Okay, so translation, her sister finally just kills her. So then, as everyone can probably guess, the sister marries the husband and becomes the lady of the house. And so the dead sister gets stuck there in this realm, okay? And because it's a ghost story, and she's unable to move forward to the next realm. So she stays there watching her husband and her sister and her daughter live this happy life that she believes was supposed to be her life. And herself as a ghost just gets angrier and angrier, and her rage gets bigger and bigger because she's been cheated out of her life. And so they go back to the pattern that they set up earlier in the story after she first got married. They show her in spirit form wandering around the old manor, and the narrator keeps saying she would sleep, she would wake, she would walk. And time went by. How much time it was impossible to reason. Sleeping, waking, walking. Sleeping, waking, walking. So the story goes on, and like I said, I don't have time to go into all the details, but her spirit stays in the manor, and she actually ends up having her home at the bottom of a lake on the grounds. And so as the series continues, they show like through the years as her family leaves and other families come and go, all the time they're always coming in and finding these muddy footprints, and it's so mysterious, they never know what's happening. But when we get to this episode, then the audience says, okay, then we understand where the muddy footprints are coming from, because she's getting up out of the lake when she wakes up and walking back into the house, trying to find her family. So it's a wonderful story if you like that kind of thing. I do. But the part I want to focus on for today's purposes, as I said, is the part where she decides by force of her own will to create a reality for herself that is not in her highest interest, because she will not surrender to a higher will. A reality that's keeping her spirit tied to its past pain. A reality that won't look at the truth that her physical body is dead and that she should move on to the next phase of her journey. That's the symbolism here. She's not ready to accept that reality. It's like my brother spoke about a few weeks ago, and I repeated last week. We are powerful creators because we have been created in the image and likeness of the ultimate creator. And he, as ultimate creator, respects our creation. So if we want to create this misery for ourselves, where we won't move forward and we're tied to our pain and we won't surrender our will to the higher divine will, then he lets us do that. Okay, if we choose to create a reality for ourselves where we place our will above the divine will because as a 2-year-old we think we know it all already, then whether we look at it as God's will or the divine will within that exists within us as our own Christ consciousness, then we create for ourselves, as she did, a hellish and painful existence in and I think that that's a wonderful metaphor in the story of how we stay stuck like her spirit stayed stuck. Okay, so let's continue with it. I want to read a little passage now about what happened to this woman's spirit because she chose to stay even after her physical death. She chose to stay a prisoner to her pain. So that's the reality she's created for herself. And symbolically, her spirit has remained a prisoner on the grounds of the manor where she had died. But to me, this passage describes what happens to us when we choose to stay down in our lower vibrations, okay? And we refuse to acknowledge that there's a different perspective to look at it from. So the setup to this scene is her former husband and daughter are getting ready to leave the manor because they believe it's cursed. The terrible, mysterious death of her sister, the second one now has died, which I'm not going to tell you how that happens in case you want to watch this. But they didn't know what happened, so they think the place is cursed. They think this trunk with all of the first wife's clothing and jewelry in it is cursed. So before they leave, they take it out, which, again, this is another little symbolic thing. Her ghost is actually inside the trunk when they decide to throw it in the lake because she's, wants to get back in all of her dresses and look at all her jewelry, which to me, the symbolism of that is the more we are connected to our things, our possessions, the more we stay down in that lower vibration. All right, so that was another little thing of symbolism. So they think that the trunk is cursed and they throw it into the lake. Okay, so moving on. Listen to how this passage beautifully describes here how she gets stuck for eternity in this pain loop of hers. And it's also very descriptive, I think, of how we all get stuck if this is what we choose to create. So the father and the daughter throw the trunk in the lake, and she says, this final insult of being cast into the swampy depths while her daughter would grow to womanhood without her, this absolute abandonment shattered her heart. The feeling of being pulled towards some other place, some realm beyond, had faded in the years since her death. But now she rejected it outright with every ounce of her considerable will, as she had when she was sick and against all probability would not go. So as I said, if you want to resist the pull of being taken higher to a higher consciousness, God will let you do that. He'll let you stay down there if that's what you choose. And that's what it's talking about here. The happy part of eternity kept trying to pull her, and she was still stubbornly saying, no, I'm not going to go. The pull of the next world ignored, she instead made her own gravity, a gravity of will that would change the terrain of the manor. And once again, she would sleep, she would wake, she would walk. How many nights, how many walks? She could no longer count. All things fade, all things, flesh, stone, even stars themselves. Time takes all things. 'Tis the way of the world. Okay, so time out. Here, what this is talking about is this human experience here on this earth plane. Here, as we've talked about before, everything necessarily decays. And if we don't learn when to let go, when to choose the higher will and move forward or upward in consciousness, if we don't continue to learn and to grow and to practice, then we will decay with this world around us. So that's what happens when we choose to stay in our lower nature. That's the moral of this story. And then the narration ends with this. The past recedes, memories fade, her own name forgotten, her sister's name forgotten. So little did she remember that she was no longer a person at all, not a name or a face, just need and loneliness and rage. Her fate was a nightmare. And of course, then they show this faceless monster she's become. But again, the symbolism is, if you decide you're going to stay down here and have it your way and go by your will alone and never surrender to a higher will, that's what happens. You just fade as a person and you become, like we've been talking about in the series, The Power of Now with Eckhart Tolle, you become your pain. It says she wasn't even a person anymore. She was just need and loneliness and rage. Okay, happy Halloween. There was your ghost story. But seriously, I thought that it was so symbolic of what happens to us when we choose our will over God's. We get trapped in a horror story of our own making. So, what's the alternative? Well, of course, the alternative would be saying, not my will, but thine, just like Jesus did in the garden. Okay, when Jesus was ready to move up a level, that's what he said, not my will, but thine. So moving up a level always involves humility and surrender. Okay, we've got to go back to the beginner's mind. It's the upside down kingdom. We don't move up in consciousness by being arrogant. We move up in consciousness by being humble. As an example of this, I want to read another beautifully written passage. This time it is not from a ghost story, but from an academic paper written by our very own pastor. This is from a paper he wrote for one of his classes, and I was so impressed when I read it. I was really impressed. So the paper that he wrote is comparing Jesus and his experience in the garden to an experience of a fictional character in an opera called Don Giovanni. And Don Giovanni, like our ghost in the ghost story, decides he's going to choose his own will over the divine will, and so his outcome is very different than the outcome of Jesus. So here it is, and in my opinion, it is every bit as poetic as the ghost story, and it even has a graveyard in it, okay? So we're still kind of on our Halloween theme. He says, one man staggers into a garden. The other strolls through a graveyard. One man embodies surrender. The other emboldened by insurrection. One is praying, Praying, the other unwilling, better unable to relinquish a lifetime of praying, Preying, as in preying on other people. One passes a test, the other protests. One declares, not my will, but thine. The other insists, not thine, but mine. One man ethically, purposefully wonders, while the other aesthetically, instinctively wanders. Just like the ghost wandered around that manor, just wandering. Jesus enters the Garden of Gethsemane, his will barely clinging to life, gasping for final breaths. Don Giovanni walks into a graveyard, and in this place of death, his will chooses to live. Bizarre imagery, a garden of death and a graveyard of life. A garden where life is born and blossoms becomes the final resting place of the will of Jesus. A graveyard where things are laid to rest serves as reinforcement and the rebirth of Don Giovanni's will. Ultimately, the death of the will of Jesus in the garden yields a harvest of life. Inversely, Don Giovanni's inability to crucify his will in the graveyard and later at dinner finally results in his death. What willingly dies in a garden springs forth into life. That which escapes death in a graveyard meets its end. It becomes painfully obvious that Giovanni does not possess the capacity to grasp the Christ ideal that whoever desires to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. The emergence of Jesus from the Garden of Gethsemane is bloody yet unburdened by will and humbly triumphant, ethically victorious. The exodus of Don Giovanni from the graveyard serves as the inversion of Gethsemane, burdened with pride, arrogantly, ignorantly defeated, and aesthetically damned. Beautifully, elegantly written. He must have had a wonderful high school English teacher. Wink, wink, that was me. Okay. So, but that's how we get unstuck. We shift our perspective away from the stuckness where we usually are because we've dug our heels in and decided we will exalt and trust our own will before our will is capable of being trusted. Remember what I said? We're kind of still toddlers, so we want to trust in our own will, but we're not ready for that yet. We will be someday if we keep practicing, but not right now. So when we shift our focus away from that and turn it toward the divine will or the higher nature that's already inside us by focusing on the you rather than on the stuck, then that you becomes a me. I'm stuck in the middle with me, with myself. When we're stuck, we must focus on changing the only thing we can, which is ourselves. And we do that by humbling ourselves and realizing there is a power much greater and an intelligence much smarter than us that we must surrender our will to. Then, and only then, can we move up those levels of consciousness, all the way from being a victim to creating as God creates. It's like Bishop Paulk used to say, dogs have little dogs, pigs have little pigs, gods have little gods. Yes, we are gods, but we're still little gods, even after all this time since creation. We're still learning, we're still growing, and right now, we're in pause. We're not stuck, we're in pause. So let's take advantage of that. Let's take advantage of the pause to practice our creation skills. And even if we feel like we're stuck, we know now how to get out of it. Humble yourselves, surrender to the divine will, and automatically we'll move up into that higher consciousness and vibration. Amen?
I want to know if your ghost story was from Dark Shadows.
It was not.
It was not. I'm disappointed. I don't know if anybody remembers the show Dark Shadows, but my sister is very much addicted. She sends me little videos during the week of these scary scenes, and the scary scene usually is a person going like this. I mean, it's just. I believe that Benny, Randy, and Esther folks and I could go into the costume room downstairs and find better props right now to produce a show in the fellowship hall than Dark. It's so bad that it's good. Yeah, that's true. Well, hopefully you are able to embody that teaching today, and to know that you are not just your will, you are not just your ideas, but you are the beginner's mind that is perpetually open to what Spirit wants to speak to and through you. And so, what a wonderful place in life to be able to admit that you don't know everything. Wonderful. Some of the greatest answers that have ever been given are just this: I don't know. I don't know opens all those possibilities. And so we're glad that you were able to connect with that today. I was, I think there was a technical difficulty with getting the names to me today from Facebook and however you're connecting today. So we're just going to give a shout out to everybody. Everybody gets a shout out today. Everybody gets one. And so we did finish. It looks like there's at least more than 50 people on today. We're so sorry for the 50 people who have not gotten their specific shout out today. We are sending out a letter probably in the next few days, letting you know of some exciting things at Spirit and Truth and some opportunities for some in-person services. We're going to start talking about this a little bit now, so that when it happens, it's not a shock to anybody. But we are going to divide the church up into 4 different sections, not in the sanctuary, but as the membership. And so I think it's last names beginning A through D can come the first week. Last names beginning E through I can come the second week of November. J through P is the third week of November. And then Q through Z would be the fourth week in November. And so we're excited. It's going to put us at about maybe not more than 100 people for each service, and everybody's socially distanced, wearing our masks, refusing to touch and hug each other, and being respectful of space and all those things. And so we're going to see how it goes in November, and then maybe just take it as in a flexible way from there on. But we are excited to at least open that up, and also excited that you are mature enough to decide for yourselves. Should I go? Shouldn't I go? Do I have any health risks? this is not a mandate to come to church. This is an invitation if you'd like to come and you don't feel at risk in any way. And so we'll be checking everybody's temperature at the door, practicing. Even the first, Brandy was telling me Sunday when she and seeing the other worship leaders were standing out on the front of the stage, just the concern because they can't sing with their masks on, to maybe even move back a couple of rows. And so we are a church that is not anti-science. I can promise you that. We are not anti-medicine, or we believe that God has put scientists in place, the medical professionals in place to give us advice. And so we want to make sure that we're following those, keeping your health first before any other thing. And so look for that letter soon. And then also, as Halloween is coming up, you have your trunk or treat opportunity, especially for our young people. I feel there's a little place in my heart that just feels so bad for our little ones. They can't do their trick-or-treating. And but hopefully you can not trick-or-treat, but you can trunk or treat. Get your trunk treat from Spirit and Truth Sanctuary this year. And we look forward to that. We love you guys. We hope you have a great week. And try to take this message today, embody it. As we say, let this word become flesh and dwell in and among you. And every day that we live, wake up each day, God, my mind is open. My spirit is available. Take me, move me, take away from me, shift me into whatever you have. God, I'm willing and open and available for it. Amen. We love you guys. We will see you again tomorrow night for the Power of Now at 7 p.m. and then again on Sunday morning. Go in peace. Have a great week, and may God bless you.